And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So once again, in the immortal words of Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, I have seen a relatively new movie. A couple of weeks ago, it was Ryan Coogler's, how many collaborations? Third, fourth, with Michael B. Jordan's Sinners, which I later found out was actually a spin on the Blade screenplay that Ryan Coogler wrote that ended up not getting used because the Blade project has been postponed, and then it was postponed again, then it was postponed again, and then Wesley Snipes played the character in Deadpool and Wolverine, so who knows if we will ever get the Mahershala Ali Blade movie. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think it would have happened already. But I have also seen in the new movie realm and in the horror genre, I saw Death of a Unicorn. Now, when I first watched it, if I had been asked what I've given it let's say out of 10, I think I would have given it a 7 or 7.5 out of 10. Unfortunately, the intervening time since actually seeing the film and now running it back, I don't think it's as good as a 7 out of 10. I think it's closer to a 5 or a 6. And this is another one of those movies where I can hear Andrew Dice Clay as Ford Fairlane in the eponymous Adventures of Ford Fairlane from 35 years ago at one moment in the film screaming, "Pick a lane, asshole." The problem with Death of a Unicorn, in a weird way, it comes down to casting. I like Paul Rudd, but Paul Rudd being in this movie gives us an idea that it's going to be more comedic than it ends up being. And I feel like they should have just gone for the jugular. They should have just made a straight up horror film and not had comedic asides because Paul Rudd is in the film. And it was not a box office hit. This film, it's a pretty expensive looking movie and only cost $15 million to budget and market. And it barely grossed more than that worldwide. So that's just not good, because you have this terrific cast of not only Paul Rudd, but Jenna Ortega, who's certainly a lot of heat surrounding her because of the success of the Addams Family. And then in supporting roles, you have Will Poulter, who's terrific, and Téa Leoni, who I've been a fan of since Bad Boys 30 years ago. She's I would say the only good thing about that movie, if I may say. I think the film sucks, but she's good. And then she was really good in Deep Impact a couple of years later. And our super duper home run hitter of a supporting actor in the fantastic Richard E. Grant. He's such a distinctive actor. And I see what they're going for here. They didn't want to make a straight up horror movie. They wanted to make a movie that was lighthearted in spots, but then when we get to the horror, it is supposed to take us by surprise because we're not expecting it to be as brutal and raw as it turns out to be. And it's difficult to blend lighthearted with full-on terror. And John Landis' American Werewolf in London figured out how to do it 44 years ago. And obviously Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson with the Scream movies in the mid-90s, they figured out how to do it, but those are different kinds of films. And in the case of American Werewolf in London, that movie itself was a unicorn because it has even bawdier moments of just pure comedy and slapstick level stuff, and then gore and viciousness and almost X-rated horror. Whereas Scream is just, it's a Freddy Krueger, Jason, Michael Myers type of a story. It's not supernatural. It's self-contained, and it doesn't deal with otherworldly shit, as does American Werewolf in London and Death of a Unicorn. I was with the story, the kind of difficult relationship between Paul Rudd's character and Jenna Ortega. They play father and daughter. But there were a lot of things that the more I ponder it, the more I just don't think that this would have happened this way or that would have happened that way. This would have happened the other way. And there appears to be a lot of what I would call inconsistency in the other three characters. I feel like Paul and Jenna, their characters make more sense, especially Jenna Ortega. See, if this film had been a bigger hit, she would have gotten a lot more acclaim for her performance than she did because she's really committed to the bit. And she has the most interesting character. The issue is that I don't get Will Poulter's character at all. The character does not make any sense to me. And Téa Leoni's character goes back and forth seemingly between being completely clueless and being supposed to be, okay, she's smarter than anyone here. And it just seems to flip back and forth. Whatever the needs of the plot are at that moment, she's either, okay, she's got an IQ below dull normal, or no, she knows what's going on. She's really smart. It doesn't really work. Now, I like the idea of unicorns just in general. And there's little tiny hint and what I think are homages to Ridley Scott, well, what would amount to Ridley Scott's director's cut or final cut of Blade Runner, where the notion of a unicorn is actually that's the whole kit and caboodle in that film. The idea of unicorns potentially, because they can't exist, that they are magical beings, literally, figuratively, symbolically, and that if this or these magical beings did occur in what we believe to be the natural world, the real world, well, we would certainly want to investigate. We would want to study them. And this movie then gets into that angle in more detail. The movie, like, if you don't know anything about this, it appears to be going in a different direction than it ends up going. And I just feel like it's easy for me to sit here and Monday morning quarterback and say, well, this isn't really, I don't think that they should have done it this way, but they're trying to hit targets. They're definitely trying to hit targets in this. And so Richard E. Grant's character is not necessarily that old, but he's a guy he's dying. And he has connection to healthcare industry, and there's Luigi Mangione jokes that can be made. There's Matt Damon's Rudy Baylor in The Rainmaker facing down Leo Drummond, as played magnificently by Jon Voight in one of his classic mustache twirling villains that he played so well during that decade. But there's a lot of jokes that you can make about the idea of a billionaire healthcare CEO type guy who, well, medicine of today has failed him. He is going to die, and he is going to die a painful, protracted death as we meet him. And Paul Rudd plays an attorney who is about to sign some paperwork to get power of attorney, and he's going to make tons of money. His story is tragic, and it's another reason why I don't get why Paul Rudd was cast. I feel like the film just takes a different tack if it's someone else, but the wife has died. He's a widower. Wife has died tragically. And he has promised, or had promised her, that he basically would, whatever he had to do to make as much money as possible so that their daughter would never lack for anything. They don't say wouldn't have to take out student loans, but we can infer what she's talking about. And so he's in this situation where he's dealing with these really lousy billionaire family. They suck. They're just schmucks, basically, if you forgive my expression here. But he's going to go through with it, and while they're on their way there, they crash into a unicorn, and they appear to kill it. The title of the movie is literal, but it's also figurative, and it's also symbolic. Like, this movie is it's trying to hit a lot of different targets, and it's not just attempting to scare us. I feel like it might have been better if they had just decided we're going to make a lighthearted fantasy about a guy killing a unicorn that, spoiler alert, is not going to stay dead because it's a magical creature, and that's why, like I say, because reasons. But he hits a unicorn on their way to this billionaire pad, and the unicorn seems to develop some sort of spiritual connection with Jenna Ortega's character. That angle is not really gotten into as much as I think it could have. Like, there were just a lot of different moments watching this film. As somebody who, as many of you know, worked on the outer edges of the movie business for more than 2 decades, it feels like this script needed another couple of passes. Like, I'm watching the film and then thinking back on it. There are various points where if I had been, for example, a creative executive reading this script, I would have said, well, maybe this isn't the best way. What else could we do here? And there were a number of times where I was sort of scratching my head, but I was going along with it because the story was engaging, and the effects work, when it comes, is really well done. This seems like a more expensive movie than it is. And there are those who would take issue with the theatricality of the performances by both Will Poulter and Téa Leoni. Like, Téa Leoni seems to be having a great time, and that does resonate with the audience. It doesn't look like she's acting. It looks like she's just having a blast. Will Poulter, he's a really good actor, but the character just, to me, makes no sense. He is illogical, and then he's not illogical, and then maybe he's a killer, but he's just a kid. I don't understand that character at all. It just doesn't make sense. But the film gets into the angle of, if, hypothetically, unicorns do exist, and unicorns have magical properties. Let's just say if we could isolate some piece of a unicorn, say we don't even have to hurt the animal, the magical animal that can't exist, but in the world of this movie does. Let's say that we could do something very, very non-invasive. We just take a hair, maybe a little bit of a hoof or something along those lines. Maybe even the unicorn horn. But we're not going to damage the animals. We figure out a way to isolate something with the animal, and we test it on people who are infirm or who otherwise have physical problems. Well, Paul Rudd's character has asthma, and he is, quote unquote, exposed to the unicorn at a certain point, and he suddenly does not have asthma anymore. His lungs are fine. So the Richard E. Grant character gets wind of this, and he's dosed, as if it's actual medication, of some of the essence, if you will, of the unicorn, and he makes a miraculous recovery. Now, where this movie, from a satire perspective, so they could have just made this a black comedy, they could have made it a satire, it just feels like there were a lot of choices made that have me scratching my head. But they're already billionaires. Richard E. Grant's character is old enough where he may already have been retired. They don't need any more money. How about we just keep this to ourselves? We can keep this to ourselves, and Paul Rudd can sign a non-disclosure agreement where he's not going to go public with what they found. He doesn't have asthma anymore, and everybody, maybe this will be a little bit like the Holy Grail and the cup of Christ in Last Crusade, and there are elements of that here where you can't do this the way that you want to. Everybody wants eternal life, but you know what? The way the knight did in that temple in Last Crusade, I don't know that I would necessarily want to be that guy reading scripture for 300 years, waiting for somebody to stick a knife through me so that then he can read scripture for 300 years. No, thank you. I'm all set here. But the idea is really funny of this family that they're billionaires, and they want to corner the market. They're already calculating how much more money they can make bottling this up, proprietary blend, whatever it's going to be. And I guess if they're worth between 1 and 2 billion, maybe in a few years they can be worth 10 billion. OMG. So I feel like the film should have pushed the satire harder. It really doesn't. And there are a lot of people that are not going to get it. They're not going to get the joke. They're not going to follow it to its logical conclusion that you don't need to do this. You already have enough. Hey, asshole, you were going to die. You were on a fucking respirator and then a ventilator. You were not able to breathe. You were going to die a horrible death. And now that you've been cured, in the way of Malcolm McDowell, oh, I'm cured. Now you want to make more money. That's what you want to do. If you want to say that the comeuppance that some of the characters meet is earned because they're such clowns, okay. I don't know. I wanted something other than the run out of the film to take place. Or maybe it's just that Paul Rudd was the wrong actor. I have no idea. It just seems like there was a lot of stuff in this film that could have been gone over again. And having said that, it's not bad. The Rotten Tomatoes score is in the 50s, which would indicate reactions exactly as I'm having, where you have some people giving it a kind of a modified thumbs up. So I'll say it's a modified thumbs up. I would recommend people to see it. This is a movie that is high quality. The production, the actors, the set design, the costume design, the effects work is all top notch. I'm taking issue with some of the casting because of the story they were telling, I'm only taking issue with casting. Because if this was made as more of a comedy, then Paul Rudd, no problem. Because in the Ghostbusters movie, I wasn't thinking of Frozen Empire, the one before that, he has some serious moments, a little bit of Dana Barrett, and the horror movie elements with him in that film I actually thought worked. But this movie, he's asked to do stuff that I don't think, in this instance, in my opinion, I don't think plays to his strengths. But I would recommend anybody see this. It's streaming on Max. And as I was saying with the Rotten Tomato score, if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, you will see very few people either giving this film incredibly high ratings or saying this is straight up trash. The 53% feels legitimate. That means it's rotten. You have to be at least 60% on Rotten Tomatoes to be considered fresh. But it's the right score, because you look at reviews that give it a fresh. They're favorable but qualified, similar to me. Maybe they took less issue. I would have, as I said, certainly called it fresh, and I would have given it a 7 or 7.5 out of 10 when I saw it. It's just that more of these issues are cropping up after having seen the film. But it is streaming on Max. If you get Max, or HBO Max as it's once again called, you don't have to pay, because if you go on Amazon Prime, you might pay $6, $7, $8, or $9 to rent this. There isn't any reason to do that if you also get HBO Max, which, by the way, Sinners is on Max as well. So the foreshadowing is deliberately on the nose. The movie is telling us exactly what's going to happen. And I was hoping that it was misdirection that we're supposed to believe, because there are movies that do that, where they put ideas in the heads of the viewer that, okay, it's going to go down this path, and it doesn't. This was a little bit more on the nose, where Jenna Ortega's character learns some information and she shares it, and she says, if we do this, here's what's going to happen. They do it, and this is what happens. And I guess the other issue is the arbitrary nature of how the unicorns act and who they decide to target with their wrath and who they don't, because you can make a very easy argument that Paul Rudd's character should have been the first to get bumped off. And, it's not much of a spoiler to say he doesn't get bumped off, like in the way of Clint Eastwood in Absolute Power, still alive at the end. And if you only read the book, you say, well, how could he be alive at the end? His character is dead halfway through the book. Well, it's not the same thing when you're making a movie. So there is, if you want to say there's inconsistency with the unicorns, okay. But at the end of the movie, I felt like I had at least seen something different. So, you talk to me in a week and maybe I'll have turned back and said, you know what, the casting of Rudd was okay. I just maybe was thinking of the movie differently than I am today. Because I do believe that this is a film that people's opinions are going to shift and are going to change. It is strange, though, that it didn't connect with audiences, because it got enough good reviews where, when you would see ads on the internet, on TikTok or Instagram or even Facebook, there were enough big critics saying, hey, this is terrific. People should have gone to see it and form their own opinions, as I did. And I didn't even know that it was, on, that it had landed on Max. And I got tricked. I know this is going to sound stupid. I was looking at Amazon Prime, and I saw Karate Kid Legends, the new one with Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio. And I clicked on it, and I thought, because it was listed with Prime, I thought that it was on. Yeah, it's available to rent for $20. And that's what I'm saying with Sinners and Death of a Unicorn. If you get HBO Max, don't spend money that you don't have to. It's not like you get a badge of honor spending even $6. I understand you have the money. I don't ever like telling people to spend their money, but you pay for these streaming services. I am the kind of personality. My dad was an accountant. I always say he was very thorough, and he was the sort of person who would look into what streaming service is this on. Oh, I get that. I don't have to pay the $5. It's not a question of being able to pay. If you get it, you get it. You don't need to spend any extra money. I know the great stories. Some of you remember this. Late Night with the Devil, that fantastic film with David Dalmatian. What an absolute masterpiece. I mean, that's to me the best horror film in the last 2 decades. Not even that, Conjuring. Late Night with the Devil, the best horror film I've seen in the last 2 decades. But in that case, that movie landed on some streaming services while it was still playing in theaters. And Shudder, which I think is connected with MGM Plus, but Shudder was running a promotion that just happened to be run at the same time, where if you got a 7-day free trial, you got a 7-day free trial, and you had complete access to Shudder's library. Late Night with the Devil happened to be on Shudder, so rather than going to Amazon Prime and spending the $20, I did the free trial. And the joke, of course, is that I was sticking it to the man. Whoever the man is, I was sticking it to him by getting to see that movie on a free trial. So Death of a Unicorn, it ended up grossing just over 16 million on a budget of 15. So as I say, not a success. It didn't ignite at the box office. Many people thought that it was going to. So the fact that it didn't do well at the box office has nothing to do with anything that I just said. There are certain films, people watch the previews, and it just doesn't get them to want to, go to the theaters. Whereas other movies, you're in line. Sinners, for example, was not something that you would have necessarily expected to be an enormous hit, even with the great reviews. Because, for example, the Stephen King story that was adapted into a film, The Life of Chuck, which got mostly rapturous critical reviews, it didn't make any money, and people are scratching their head. But on the other hand, he has the film coming out, when I say he, based on a Stephen King story, The Long Walk. The visibility factor for that film is through the roof, and I believe that is going to be an enormous hit, even if it's not good. But my sense is it's going to be a good adaptation of really one of Stephen King's most bruising works. And I think it may have been the first, the first work, his first novel, and then it ended up being part of the Bachman books. That's a whole other story. I mentioned that during the episode on the Glenn Powell iteration of The Running Man. But Death of a Unicorn, I recommend you see. Right now I'm between 5 and 6 out of 10 on the movie, but I know other people who have seen it and would have put it more at 7 to 8. They like the fact that it is very much full of surprises, but there is a lot of stuff that is very nail meathead. It is very on the nose. And, the Richard E. Grant character he symbolizes a certain kind of person that no matter how much money he has, it's never enough. And, him getting his comeuppance, spoiler alert, some people will take delight in it. It's really a matter of how you see such things. There's no judgment here in my podcast, and the movie doesn't necessarily make judgment, because there are killings which feel very arbitrary, and there are people who are saved, and you're scratching your head, well, I don't really understand. But that's when you have a movie with creatures that can't exist, that are magical, shit happens. And don't take my word for it. This movie is quality. It's good enough for you to pass 2 hours in front of the TV, on a Friday night, a Saturday night, you want to turn the lights out. There are some pretty good jump scares in the second half. And my issues are not with any of the performers. It's just with the ways the characters often come across. And it's a difficult tone, and I feel like the film doesn't quite get the tone where it needs to be to truly be successful. But as I said, it's just my opinion. And in the immortal words of Dennis Miller, when he had the old HBO show, he always used to close his rants with, "It's just my opinion. I could be wrong." And I very well could be wrong. You might see this film and light me up in the comments and say, "Bro, you've had some good takes. This is your worst take ever. This is a 10 out of 10. Unsubscribe, unfollow. You suck." Hey, I put myself out there for criticism, and I hope if you see this film, you absolutely love it. Death of a Unicorn. Damn, I can't remember the name of the filmmaker. Too many colliding thoughts. But starring Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega as father and daughter, and Richard E. Grant, Téa Leoni, and a really good Will Poulter, even if his character makes no sense. He's a great actor. He's fucking boss. I even liked him as Adam Warlock in Guardians of the Galaxy 3. The movie is currently streaming on HBO Max, where you don't have to pay if you get the service. And I give it a kind of modified thumbs up. Siskel and Ebert used to just do thumbs up or thumbs down. This is a movie that I recommend you watch, because the odds are, my sense is, you're going to like it more than I did, because you're not going to be seeing as many different things which may or may not be there as I did. This has been episode 588 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.